Chapter 3 The Great Peace. This is the story that Danny's father told. It was long ago. It was a time when our people had forgotten the original instructions of our Creator. Be good to each other, our Creator told us. Live together in peace, but we had forgotten. Now our people fought with each other. The Mohawk and the Onondaga, the Cayuga and the Seneca, and the Oneida were always at war. It was nation against nation, and within our nations it was village against village. And if one man was killed, then the other men of his village would seek revenge in a blood feud, taking a life for a life. The sun itself loves to see war, our people said. That is why we have such power. And they continued to fight with each other. Now, among our people there was one man who wanted peace. His name was Ianwatha. He was a Mohawk, but he left the Mohawk people when his sister died. He mourned her death, but the Mohawk people were so used to war and death that they made fun of him in his grief. So he took his canoe and went to the west toward the lands of the Onondaga. I will comfort others who are filled with sorrow, he said, because no one will comfort me. Anonwatha had a family, a wife, and 7 daughters. He worried about what things would be like for his children's children. So while he lived among the Onondagas, he spoke of peace. But the Onondagas were ruled by a man who was a sort of a monster. His name was Anandrohan, and his mind was full of evil thoughts. His thoughts were so twisted that he had snakes growing from his head. His body was twisted too, so that he was crooked 7 places in his body, and he had killed many people with his wizardry. Top of page 28. He was so evil that he could make birds fall dead out of the sky. Ianwatha was a great speaker. When he spoke about peace, the people of the warring Onondaga towns came to the council held in his house and listened to him. His words were good. Now, the people said, we must do something about Anandrohan. We must pacify him, for he continues to kill people. We cannot have peace as long as his mind is not straight. This is true, Ianwatha said. I shall go to Anandrahan and tell him about peace. Anandrahan lived in a nest made of reeds in the swamp on the other side of the lake. We shall do this, Ianwatha said. We shall go by canoe across the lake. But as soon as the canoes were in the lake, the loud voice of Anandrahan was heard across the waters. A storm is coming to wash over you. And as those words were spoken, a great wind came, and the waves rose, and the canoes were turned over. Many people drowned, and the others swam back to shore. Once again, the people tried to reach Anandrahan to bring peace to him. Top of page 29. We shall walk around the lake to come to Anandrahan's place, Ananwatha said. But as they walked around the lake, the loud voice spoke again, and the ground became marshy, and the people could go no further. Each time they tried to reach the monster Anandrahan, they failed. Then a terrible thing happened. One by one, Ianwatha's daughters died by the evil magic of Anandrahan. Now, Ananwatha was full with grief. He did not know how to rid himself of his sorrow. He left the lands of the Onondaga and began to wander. First, he went south up Onondaga Creek. He crossed over Bear Mountain and camped at its foot. That night, he heard a song. Hi, hi, agawiya, hi, hi, agawiya. So the song began. Hi, hi, it is good indeed. Hi, hi, it is good indeed. Its words were words of peace, and he put that song in his heart and held it. The next morning he climbed the mountain. There he saw a wonderful sight, page 31. A corn plant was growing there on the mountain top. It had 4 roots and 5 stalks, and on each stalk were 3 ears of corn. A great turtle with a red and yellow belly was dancing there near the corn plant, dancing the dance which we now call the Great Feather Dance. I heard singing last night, Ananwatha said. I was the one who sang, said the turtle. This is the great corn. You will make the nations of the longhouse like this. The 5 nations will grow from one plant, and the 4 roots will stretch to the north and the west, the south and the east. Then Ianwatha put what he had seen and heard into his heart, and he continued on his way till he came to a group of lakes on a hill. There on the lake closest to him were so many ducks and geese that the surface of the lake could not be seen. "Why are so many of you here?" Ianwatha said to the birds. At the sound of his voice they all flew up at once and carried with them all the water from the lake. Then Ianwatha walked across the dry lake bed where there were many small shells. As he walked among them, he thought of his grief and began to pick up the shells and place them in the deerskin pouch that he carried with him. Page 32. When he had gathered many shells, he continued on his way for 2 more days, until he came to an old abandoned cornfield and a shelter roofed with cornstalks. He made a campfire there. Then from the fibers of dried plants he made string, and on the string he placed the shells. When he had made 3 strings of shells, he put 2 poles in the ground and laid another pole across them. Then he hung the 3 strings of shells on the pole and sat there and began to talk to himself. He talked about his grief and how it might be lifted. He bowed his head and talked about peace. Now, as Ianwatha had traveled from place to place, he had heard of a man who was among the Mohawk people. This man, it was said, was a messenger from the Creator. People called him the Peacemaker. His coming had been foretold in a great dream which had been sent by the Creator to all the leaders. In that dream they were told that the word of peace would be brought to them by a man who was a holy messenger. But even though the Peacemaker carried a great message, people were not listening to him. He was not a good speaker because he had been born with a double row of teeth, so when he spoke, his words did not come out clearly. As Ianwatha spoke to himself the words of peace, he began to understand. One man alone could not bring peace. It had to be done by people working together. I must find the Peacemaker, Ianwatha said, and he turned towards the lands of the Mohawk people. Each night he camped and made a fire and hung the 3 strands of shells from a pole. Each night as he sat, he spoke of peace and said these words: "If I should see someone in grief, I would lift these shells from this pole and console him. The shells would become words, and the darkness would be lifted from him." At last the smoke from his fire was seen by the chief man of another village. A messenger was sent. When the messenger returned and told of what he had seen, a man sitting by a fire, speaking of peace and the way to lift grief, the headman understood. This is Ianwatha, who has left his home at Onondaga, top of page 34. We have heard of him. He is the one who will meet the great man, the Peacemaker. This, too, was foretold by the dream. So the headman sent a messenger, and Ianwatha was brought to the village. There he stayed until the words came to them about where the Peacemaker was waiting. They traveled many days, and when they came to the Peacemaker, the great man rose to his feet and said to Ianwatha, "Younger brother, I see that you are suffering." Although the Peacemaker's words were not clearly spoken, Ianwatha understood them. He told the Peacemaker of his grief. The Peacemaker listened to his words and took the strings of white shells that symbolized Ianwatha's many troubles. "Now, younger brother," he said, "I shall lift your sorrow from you." So it was that the first condolence was done and the first wampum strings were used by our people.